deciding factor. What's inside our hearts to know. This is what Yahweh's after. Half of Yahweh's lost. That's the deciding factor. What's inside our hearts to know. It's what Yahweh's after. If it's not forever, we don't want it. We don't want it. We don't want it. Our lives. If it's not eternal, we don't need it. If it doesn't have life, it won't survive. Great peace, have the deciding factor.
All right, praise on. Can open in prayer. Great merciful Heavenly Father Yahweh, this is your Son, your servant, slave, a priest in your house, Shimon Yari Hawkins, come before you on the headship and unity of the body of priests, being seated the last days and night of witness. Great God, your Hawkins, the most top teacher, judge, and guide, Yeshua Messiah. We, your people, gather together before you, Father Yahweh, as we rehearse the words of your witness brought forth in the sixth book of Yisrayl, Father Yahweh. We do ask that you would stir up our pure hearts and minds to remembrance of the testimony that he brought forth. He was prophesied, Father Yahweh, to speak on your behalf, Father Yahweh, to draw out a people, to train them, Father Yahweh, for position in your kingdom. We thank you and praise you, and we do pray and ask all these things in Yeshua Messiah's name. Hallelujah. Praise Yahweh. You can be seated. Okay, so this is chapter 39. Believe without seeing, number 4. Luke 16:31, one must be grounded in the law and the prophets, or they won't stay in the house of Yahweh. If they don't believe Moshe and the prophets, they won't believe me either. So this was given the 12th Roman month of 06. We're going to start on verse 57. And this is talking about the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom, the law, and the prophets, remember though one rose from the dead, they still wouldn't believe it if they weren't grounded in the laws of Moshe and the prophets. Remember that. So this is like that's like someone's reasoning for what it would take for them to believe. Like if you were to say, it's really just a prophecy is for the believers, and these acts of power that take place, they don't, like Pastor's gone into detail, is it doesn't, seeing something amazing at one particular moment doesn't carry on enough for a person to stay in that way unless they believe it. And like that's what the parable is going to talk about, having root in yourself and things like that. We just read it in Luke 16:31. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom, the law and the prophets, but does not understand. You get that? You can hear it, but you don't understand. How many people today have I preached to that still don't understand what the sins of fornication and adultery are causing? I would say that that's probably a decent example of, pastors always say, everyone's kind of sought out prophecy and the desire to know the future. We're kind of short-sighted, because you got to figure fornication and adultery are unlawful means of obtaining something that could be lawful, a married couple, like or things like that. But the fornication and the adultery, it's relationships without commitment or relationships where a person's already committed, and as far as they can only see as far as the fulfillment of the lust, because that's what's motivating them. But the curse that comes behind it, they can't see that far. Even if you tell them, they can't see that far because it's so clear in their mind how easy it is to fulfill a desire in a short-term span, but any thought after that of the suffering, because this is actually described as a sin against your own body, something that you would harm yourself, because self-preservation tends to be something people like to fulfill things for themselves, you get selfishness from that. But this is, they don't have enough foresight to see that they're harming themselves. It's really, so Pastor has tried, as he's had a whole series on learning to prophesy, but just trying to get us to see, kind of what the future holds for you if you do things that Yahweh tells you this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. I don't know if it says it later further on, but like when you think of it, like you've ever heard that phrase, what is it? Those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it, right? Which in some aspect, I'm not going to say the saying is wrong, but it's really like only one aspect, because the scripture says Solomon was prophesied to write, what once was will be again. Okay, but the people that don't know history are doomed to repeat it is the negative aspect of it. But there are aspects where the positive is there, where if you make positive and right choices, you can get a positive outcome. So the knowing of history and things like that is something that can, if you make proper choices, let's say the history of the scriptures and the law and the prophets, and the difference between right and wrong, you could actually use it to your benefit and make right decisions. But Pastor says that he's kind of taught against fornication, adultery, but he can't get people to see what it's causing, even though the news is full of it. He says, filled with it. We had on the news yesterday, had this man, they said, this guy from Hollywood, and they said he was the sexiest man in the world. Now, they said that about Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson, I don't know, I'm pretty sure he was a closeted homosexual. I don't know that he ever came out. and said that he was just straight outright gay, but it's well known that Rock Hudson lived that lifestyle. But I don't know. I'm not sure what magazines do it. When I was younger, I think it was like a People magazine that would do like the sexiest man alive, and a lot of the gods of Hollywood were on it, various times in their life, and I guess it's only because getting older that you can look back and you kind of see, the disgusting lives that these people lived. I remember reading a history of, there was a guy, what was he? He's the guy who made Rosemary's Baby. I can't remember what his name was, but he was a director, but he fled to France, I believe it is. I think he's in France. Roman Polanski. And he fled to a country to avoid extradition because he raped like a 12-year-old girl, and like and he won an Oscar years later, made a film called The Pianist, and there was a big uproar about, if you're going to give a rapist an award, I mean, I don't care what kind of great movie and camera shots you've made, but so he won this. They ended up giving it to him, but he can't come to the United States to get it because he will be arrested. And to bum out all the Star Wars fans out there, it was hand-delivered by Harrison Ford to Roman Polanski. It's like, so when you hear of all these people and all these gods, they live disgusting lifestyles. I mean, it's absolutely, and no fault of their own. It's just they're raised in a system of sin where nobody's clean, nobody. But they live terrible lifestyles, and later when you hear about these sexiest men alive, they're all later in their years, in their 60s, getting throat cancer, all of these things because of their past sins, and it's pastor's trying to get you to see it before it takes place, and even though the news is filled with it, it's just hard for people to see beyond the fulfillment of desire. We're supposed to live forever, not for 50 years, 70 years. But he says Rock Hudson died from a homosexual disease that was brought about by that very fact. He said that they said it about John Wayne, died of his lungs being eaten up with cancer. They say it about quite a few of these gods in heaven and in earth. If you set your hopes on this, brethren, it'll die with the gods, because the gods, there are not going to be any of these gods left. Neither will you follow them. This includes the ones they're worshiping with Christmas, pagan vanity custom filled with vanity that produces nothing but empty pocketbooks. And they fill the world banks with more money every year. That's one of them. He says James Wolfenson. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing his name, but I was looking him up, and he was actually an envoy to the quartet in 2005 to deal with the Gaza disengagement. How they're disengaging Gaza now by just leveling everything. But he was in 2005. He was special envoy to the quartet, and what he had said was, so he said he lasted 11 months in the position, and he said the U.S. undermined his effect by firing his staff. So I guess the United States kept firing the people that he had on his staff, so he couldn't do his job. And then, like he says in a quote later, that he takes responsibility for it himself. He said, if anything, I was stupid for not reading the small print. I was never given the mandate to negotiate the peace. Meaning, it's like he just had to be there. They were going to make. He just had to follow instruction, and you get to take the fall for whatever takes place. But he was never given the mandate or the authority to deal and negotiate with the peace there. That's already been decided. But he was a World Bank guy. I think he was from Australia. Who we see got the power to work this out, but he doesn't have the power to bring it about. Yahweh will bring it about or allow it to be brought about. Okay. Notice, but he does not have understanding. He's going back to the parable of the sower. If you don't understand what they're hearing, then comes the wicked one and snatches away what was sown in his heart. Now remember what he said here about understanding. This is he who receives seed by the wayside. A lot of the times you can see it. There's people that can learn things, but it's really like a communal effort to be able to, like when it talks about a rope is not easily broken with 3 strands, because, some can do and exercise a certain job and do it well, but unless they have a certain aspect of support structure, they can't stand on their own. And we being trained as leaders, we are being able to stand on our own. Not that we would have to, because we will have each other, but we're trained to be that. I always kind of take I think of, it's always in the back of my mind, Leviathan, the description given in the book of Yashub when it talks about the skin of Leviathan, saying that his scales are so tightly close together that even air can't pass through it. And what I do is Leviathan, Pastor once described it as the sick aspect of the firmament. And I just take the reverse of Yahweh's government. If you were to, swap that in reverse and you have the microorganisms working for you because you're righteous, that's kind of how the body of Messiah can govern. The unity is going to be so tight, nothing will be able to break the bond, that we'll have and the power that Yahweh can work through us, as long as we, prove ourselves worthy. So here it says, verse 20, for what was sown in the stony places, the same as he who hears the word, the law and the prophets, and at once receives it with joy. And anyone can take this message and receive it with joy. They fall into, the trap that they fall into is a lack of trust in Yahweh that, and believing into it, I remember once keeping the Sabbath, and my father that I lived with, he was what the world would call a stepfather, but he was a father to me, but he wasn't a Sabbath keeper when we were keeping the Sabbath. And he would say, I'd like to keep the Sabbath too, but some of us got to work. It's like, well, I understand that. Some of us have to work, but if you just follow Yahweh's instructions, it's, you just work the other days. But that's the mandate that society places, upon you, because here it's going to say, it's going to later talk about the cares of the world, if you look into it like societal structures, they kind of tell you what to care about and what not to care about, But here, here's your key right here. But since he has no root in himself, since he wasn't grounded in the laws of Yahweh and the prophecies, he endures only for a while. For when tribulation and persecution arises because of the word, the law, and the prophets, which it comes any time you start keeping the law, immediately he is offended. And now in verse 22, now that which was sown among the thorns is he who hears the word, the law, and the prophets, but the cares of the world. And I look at that. If you look at what the cares and concerns of the world are, like when we did the peaceful solution, it said, as a family unit, as a city, as a nation, and as the world, the different mandates placed on it. But if you look at throughout history, when they try to look at how society is structured, and a lot of it's fantasy, they come up with different stuff, but one of them is like, that I found is social contract theory. You have John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, they write these books on it, but they basically talk about, when you're going to form a society, they'll talk about, being a caveman type of thing and then finding society later. Well, we know Adam and Eve and Yahweh's government was from the beginning, but when they're trying to trace history back, they'll say those things and they'll talk about like living in a state of nature where they'll say life was brutish and short, and it was the strong survive, and you would preservation of your life and security were major concerns: food, clothing, shelter. But when they would talk about that when you formed a society, you gave up certain rights for the protection of the society or the government, what the government would provide for you. That's why, like, you have all these governments talk about a strong military and things like that. But if you look into it, they definitely tell you that you give up certain rights. You have to give, like, you're not allowed to go out and kill somebody for your preservation of your life. That's what they'll say, even though, you know, murder takes place all the time. But you're trading certain rights. And if you look at, like, the time period with Yeshua, I'm losing time, aren't I? They have a lot of that where, I'm trying not to get off on a tangent, but it's like if you look at military service, not a lot of people know about the draft, but you'll realize how you're not free when you get drafted. You know, you're not a free member of society. You'll go where the government sends you. But the cares of this world, when I hear that there's still partying, participation parties going on, when I hear this, I know that we're not out of it yet. I know that there's some that's not going to be helping in the kingdom. And really, parties are not actually that enjoyable. You know, you go to a party and it tends to just be a lot of people just sitting around and doing stuff that you could do at your own house by yourself, pretending to enjoy themselves. You know, it would be better that if you went home and studied, and then when you congregated and had righteous fellowship, you'd have something to offer at the community table that you're around. Drunkenness and slurring doesn't really do that much for anyone. Let's see. He gets into AIDS again, talking about AIDS and the 5 months of pain that come after the birth of the nuclear baby. Now, Yahweh said it won't come near you. Get rid of the mark of the beast, which means the cares, also means the cares of this world. You know, it's Sabbath and the worldly holidays, but you're not allowed to buy and sell in certain things. And if anyone remembers the blue laws, that was pretty clear that you weren't allowed to buy or sell. I know in Massachusetts they had them where I'm from. Like, it was kind of funny. You'd go into a restaurant and they would, like, cover up, like, the liquor cabinet and stuff that was in the restaurant because you weren't allowed to sell alcohol on first days. And he talks about the deceitfulness of riches chokes the word, and he becomes unfruitful. I've seen people who were trained brethren in the house of Yahweh, trained by the house of Yahweh, who went to extremes, spent money on them. He says, which I care nothing about, but we did, and then they quit. You know, and that's one of the things even with employment, is you invest a lot of time and training into someone. And if you look at being called out, a lot of us, you know, the talents that we have, you can put into the work, and it's what Yahweh, you just don't see your full potential because of the fact that, you know, as would be described, you know, we're not a complete nation unto ourselves. So some of your talents aren't necessarily realized, but it doesn't mean that you should stop learning, and the efforts that you put in are not going to pay off later. You know, don't get caught in the deception of just because you get older, any of us that are older in the room, where your body's breaking down. Even though death comes to the first body that you have to remember that you're promised eternal life, where your skills, it's one of the things that can't be taken of the things that the righteousness that you live, and the testimony that you have of keeping righteous conduct. Let's see. Love of money, I'm skipping down to 71. I got like 2 minutes. Love for money has outweighed the concern of people. Man, I'm going to skip a whole bunch. But this is in 79. He says, Jacob, so he goes into this thing. If any one of us lacks wisdom, this is 75. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask it from Yahweh, who gives to all liberally and does not revile, and it will be given unto him. And he breaks it down to be, if any one of you is destitute of wisdom, let him ask of the one giving of Yahweh. And Pastor explains of the priests that Yahweh has ordained. So that's the one. And then he talks about gives all liberally and not censoring. He goes into counsel, and people who will receive counsel, but they'll desire to censor the part that they don't like. And he talks about a man who says, a priest told me I was falling away. He told me this, and then he says, I don't agree. He told me this, meaning some aspect of instruction. And he says, I don't agree with it. And I might have to stop at that particular point, but I could say, someone asked me this week, I made a statement in passing, and a deacon asked me, if I ever got in trouble being in the House of Yahweh. And I said, well, I've gotten into trouble, not intentionally. But the way that I look at it is I've also received counsel, but I've never not agreed with it. There were times that I didn't like it, but Yahweh willing, keep that strength with me. I refuse to not agree with it. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean that I won't submit. I'm certainly not going to run my mouth. But just because you don't like something, just give yourself the time to submit to it. Because sometimes it's not in your best interest. Even though it comes from you, it's your desires. Pastor says he tried for many years to get foolish desires out of us. His desire for us is to have a position in the kingdom, and you'll be thankful for that. If you all please stand, I have a great opportunity to turn it over to the great Khan Nathaniel.
Praise Yahweh. Please be seated. When the great Khan was mentioning about whether or not, when you come up on correction, whether you like it or you don't, the best thing to do is to submit to it. And that's an understanding that is not easily conveyed. Okay, it's not easy to get that point across, because there's a lot of things that you have to do as an individual who is learning to be a priest in the house of Yahweh. There takes a lot of sacrifice. It takes a lot of sacrifice. And submitting yourself, abasing yourself, allowing yourself to be worked over to a degree. When a person, for the sake of the kingdom of Yahweh, can allow themselves to endure what they believe to be suffering, then the kingdom is yours. Because that denotes understanding, right? What the scripture says is that we endure because of the belief that we have in Yahweh. Okay, the trust in Yahweh's plan is what would allow an individual to endure the conditions that we're in today. Here, being in the chief of the nations, when we have land flowing with so-called milk and honey, but we have decided to confine ourselves to the parameters of the house of Yahweh. And learned to be pleased with that, to be content with that. That's something that the world doesn't get to experience, because they have so many other things in their mind. But this is what, again, we're in chapter 39 of the sixth book of Yisrayl, believe without seeing. Luke 16:31. One must be grounded in the law and the prophets, or they won't stay in the house of Yahweh. And if they don't believe Moshe and the prophets, they won't believe me either. Okay, so that's showing you that in order to decisively say to Father Yahweh that I will remain in the house of Yahweh, I will remain in my place, that remaining in your place means learning the standard of Yahweh in your personal life and performing it every opportunity that you've been given. Okay, performing, but this is the other portion to that. If you don't understand it, if you don't get to the point to where you understand it, it will be harder to submit to it. okay, it'll be harder to submit to it. If you train yourself to allow yourself to submit, then you will eventually obey. If you train yourself to submit, then you will eventually obey, because to obey is to follow with understanding, believing that you are being led into the kingdom of Yahweh. That's what obedience is. To submit is to follow your instructions and not know entirely why, but at least you know that you should follow your instructions, okay? So that's just a quick little breakdown, but I mean, it's in the title. It's in the title. One must be grounded in the law and the prophets, or you won't stay in the house of Yahweh. And that's not just physically being in the house of Yahweh. Stay, be firm, steady, right? Able to endure, to be stable. Your mind won't be stayed on the teachings of the house of Yahweh. You'll be taken by all these other wonderful things that the world has to offer. They'll look so pleasing and appealing to you. While the world has, Khan was talking about parties and everything. He said, look, at the parties, you just do the same thing that you would do at home by yourself. There's a caveat to that, because people like company of others, and that's what you find in parties. But the end result of going to the parties is that you leave with less in your mind. You don't leave with more in your mind. You leave with less in your mind. And so when he said, we should be studying and reading so that when we come among each other, we could talk about the law when we rise up, or talk about the law when we lay down. And it won't be like a cursory, kind of like, I have to do this. So law number 1, believe in Yahweh. Law number 2, submit to Yahweh. That's not what it means to talk about the laws of Yahweh when you rise up, when you lie down, because the laws of Yahweh pertain to everything that you experience when you lie down, when you rise up, when you walk on the road, okay? That's what the laws of life are. So I just wanted to say that. Let's get into the lesson. I want to pick up here. Kahan tried to get me to where I needed to be. But so let's go ahead and pick up on page 397, verse 79. It says, let's see, Pastor says, verse 5. How do we have it? No, that's verse 6. Pastor says, how do we have it? It says in Jacob chapter 1 and verse 6, but let him ask in conformity to the faith. Let each and every one of us ask of Yahweh in conformity to the faith. But that's understanding what the faith is. Okay? The faith is to think, compare, consider, and use similitudes the way that Yahweh thinks, compares, considers, and uses similitudes. The faith is do well unto those who do evil to you. If they speak ill of you and revile you and all of these things, pray for them. That's what the faith is. But you won't do it if you don't understand why you should. And the only way that you'll understand why you should pray for those who perform evil against you is if you submit to it. Okay, if you submit to that precept, if you submit to that point, you'll see the benefit in it. If you don't submit to it, you won't see the benefit in it, and you'll continue to be deceived with retaliation, war, get back, strife, murder, envy. You'll be convinced that that's the way that you have to react. When somebody slights you, you'll be looking for the next opportunity to get back at them. But if you operate in conformity to the faith, you'll know that Yahweh is the one who executes judgment. And his judgment is sound. And everybody involved is not harmed. And everybody is soundly corrected. If you understand that. But if you don't, then it's, he did this. Look, we're all striving to draw close to Father Yahweh in conformity to the faith. So Yahweh gives us that leeway. He gives us that space to draw close to him. So in the middle of verse 79, Pastor says, which includes what Yahshua said, if they believe not the laws of Moshe and the prophets, then you can't help them. If they don't believe the laws and the prophets, you can't help them. They simply won't believe. They won't believe even if one rose from the dead. If they won't take the laws of Moshe and the prophets, well, that's the same thing that Jacob said is saying right here, not hesitating nor censoring it, and it will be given unto him. It says in verse 6, let him ask in the faith, let him ask in the faith, not hesitating, right? Not hesitating. Again, in order to ask in conformity to the faith, you won't be afraid to ask of Yahweh. You won't be afraid to ask of your brother. You won't be afraid to stand up for the will and the way of Yahweh, because you have come to a certain understanding, and you won't stray from that understanding. You won't hesitate. Should I say it or shouldn't I say it? Should I show him the right and proper way, or shouldn't I show him the right and proper way? These are the things that the honest weights and measurements that Yahweh is teaching us in the house of Yahweh. So verse 81, therefore, one hesitating is like to a wave of the sea being wind agitated and being tossed. And we put, let him ask in conformity to the faith. Well, if you ask in conformity to the faith, what do? Of course, you go to the priest, and the priest will tell you, and don't vary from it, he says. Again, that takes understanding to do that. That takes the understanding of Yahweh to be able to subject yourself to the will of Yahweh through the priest. And not everybody is going to do it. Not everybody will show that level of trust in Yahweh in subjecting themselves to the priest. Okay, but that's what we're dealing with. That's what brings those who will be the choicest, the finest, the sacred of the sacred people of Yahweh will subject themselves to the instructions of the priest, because they trust in Yahweh, not because they trust in the priest. Okay, it's not a reliance on the priest. It's a reliance on the plan, and the priests are part of the plan of Yahweh. That's where the hope is. The hope is in the plan of Yahweh. And if Yahweh said, well, pray in unity with the priests, then that's what we should be doing. Right? Don't lose your place over something as foolish as pride and arrogance and self-willed, being impassioned by your own desires. It's weak. It's not worth it to lose your position that you can have in the kingdom of Yahweh for the sake of your own thoughts, your own desires, your own revenge, your own get back. Okay, it doesn't show wisdom then. It doesn't show wisdom. Okay, let's go to verse 83. Pastor says, verse 7, do not let this man think, and Pastor says, don't let him think that he will receive anything from Yahweh if he's this way. Well, you can't teach a person like this. Yahshua Messiah said, you can't. If a person will not, if they're not grounded in the laws of Moshe, they won't accept this, and they won't believe it. They won't believe it. You see, that takes being grounded in the law. If you understand what the law is, you'll understand. If you understand what the law is for, you'll understand and agree with what the law is trying to bring out in an individual, and you'll be patient and you'll wait to see that come forth from that individual. But if you don't understand the law and you don't know what the law is supposed to bring forth in an individual, you'll be upset at him the first time he steps on your shoes. You'll be upset at him the first time that he brushes you in the line. He kind of nudges you in the line. You're going to be mad at him. You won't have the patience to wait on Father Yahweh to bring the two of you together. And remain in your place and face him every single day, that same individual. If you have the knowledge of Yahweh, you will give that time. You will allow for that time to elapse. And it's not, time doesn't heal, time never healed one wound. There's not one wound that time healed. To heal a wound takes work. You got to perform. It doesn't matter what it is. You got cut. Your body's not sitting there waiting for air and to heal the wound. Your body is actually working on the wound continually. Platelets coming in place and to seal up the wound, and sinew upon sinew. All of these things are taking, there's a work going on. So in the same way, you and I can't just stand off and wait for your brother to eventually, hopefully come to an understanding. No, you got to present yourself every so often. Just present yourself. Present yourself. Let him know that I'm here. You know, let him know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to reverence Yahweh. I'm going to show you respect. Right? That's how we bring forth the plan, the will, and the way of Yahweh. So let's continue. Let's go over to verse 89, where Pastor says, because there's a lot that he goes into. Let's go to 85. Verse 7, where Pastor says, do not let this man think that he will receive anything from Yahweh. The double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. You remember we were talking about that stability. If you are stable enough to endure with the failings of your brother, it doesn't mean you should take all if it's just blatant rebellion and everything, it doesn't mean that you just got to sit there and take the blatant and open rebellion. But don't condemn your brother to death through his rebellion, because that's your test too. If you're experiencing it, it's your test. If you're experiencing it, it's your test. Your test is, how are you going to react? What's going to be your mentality in dealing with your brother who is in the house of Yahweh striving to overcome? So let's see here in 87, it says, look back now to Matthew 18 and keep all of this in mind now. What we just learned here from Yaakov, because it was written, these men were inspired, and this is how people, not inspired, are deceived. This is the reason they can't see. They can't understand. Remember, here a little, there a little, then rightly divide the word of truth. This is it's a math problem that we're dealing with. Every day is solving a math problem. And a math problem is not a confrontation, okay? It's a problem, but it's not a confrontation. You don't fight with your math book when you're trying to figure out what's 2 times 2. It is a problem, though, and there needs to be an equal answer. Okay, so we see here, it says, Pastor says, because it says, we'll be given the pure language. I went down a little bit, but you'll find it in the middle of verse 87. That language is, of course, what Yahweh, that language is, of course, from Yahweh. It's the book of Yahweh that will be given to you, but it will be pure. And, of course, we're working on it. That purity of the book of Yahweh is going to come from your actions. Your actions in being able to understand what Yahweh is trying to get across to us in accordance to the faith. Because we have the books of Yisrayl. And the books of Yisrayl teach us how to interpret the book of Yahweh. The book of Yahweh is giving us the way to life. And if we will allow ourselves to be bathed by the law of Yahweh, right? To allow the law of Yahweh to saturate in the mind, but you have to put it into practice. If you don't put it into practice, you won't see why you should pray for those who spitefully use you and do well to those who do evil to you, and all of these different things that Yahshua taught, right? In conformity with the faith. Let's go over to verse 96. It says, Pastor says, don't come here like a professor saying, well, I'll take this, like this professor said, well, I don't agree with this, Mr. Hawkins. I don't agree with Mr. Hawkins' interpretation of the scriptures. Well, of course, you wouldn't. His mind is blinded. The man is as evil as Hitler was. He condones everything that is going on in the world today, and none of the wicked will understand. That's a fact. I knew he wouldn't understand. There will be a time coming when his mind will be open, but he will have understanding, but not now. So when Pastor's talking about that professor, when you talk about the schools of higher learning, the schools of higher learning are so intense, it's intensive learning, such that if Yahweh doesn't call you out of that system, you can't see any other way aside from democracy, capitalism, as we see it today. You won't be able to recognize that there's another way. You'll think that when somebody offends you, then you have to retaliate. That's what the schools of higher learning teaches. That's their foundational understanding promotes retaliation. Okay? When one business takes over another business, it's called a corporate takeover. Okay, it's not, sometimes they give it a nice term, a merger, but a merger is different than a takeover. A takeover is when the other name is completely gone. A merger is like you'll have the two names there, and there's an agreement between the two. But the system teaches such a level of retaliation, and that's the reason why Pastor said, look, this college stuff is not, if you understand what the whole purpose, and, you know, my time is almost up, but if you understand the whole purpose of the schools of higher learning, the purpose of the schools of higher learning is to get you to subjugate yourself to their will, to the will of the system. That's the purpose of higher learning, the schools of higher learning. All that they're doing is they're getting you to be able to take information, break it down into little pieces. This is what you learn at Yale, Harvard, MIT, all of these places. It's very simple. Get information, break it down into its little pieces, and then put it in its appropriate place according to the system. Yahweh is showing you how to do that and more. When you study the Strong's exhaustive concordance, when you use the scriptures and look up words and everything, you're doing more than what MIT is going to show you, because you're learning, you're studying English, you're studying Hebrew, you're studying Greek, and you're studying other Latin languages also, okay, in order to come to an understanding of what Yahweh is teaching you. So you're actually ahead by studying the word of Yahweh. In Yale, Harvard, MIT, all of these different places, all they're teaching you is how to break down information and put it into the categories that they teach you. That's all that it is. And if you have this certificate, all the certificate is going to say is, yes, he has his BA in psychology, but all it means is he's able to break down information, put it into the categories that we told him to put it into. And that's what keeps you in the rat race. Okay? Your ability to think, compare, consider, use similitudes in the way that Yahweh thinks, considers, compares, and use similitudes is through study of the word of Yahweh, and that'll put you way above anybody else who has a doctorate from Yale, okay? I got it all out. Praise Yahweh. If you'd all stand, we'll go ahead and have closing prayer. Great and awesome Heavenly Father, Yahweh, this is Khan Nathaniel Abel Yael Hawkins, asking permission to come before your wonderful throne of mercy, being seated of the last days anointed witness, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, and through our most ahab, most honorable high priest, leader, guide, judge, and king, Yahshua Messiah. Father, I come before you under the headship of the priest, Father Yahweh, the priest that you have established in these last days. And we thank you, we glorify your wonderful name for this priesthood, Father Yahweh, that is going to fulfill your prophecies, is fulfilling your prophecies right now. Father Yahweh, we thank you for allowing us to be alive at this time, that we would see these things, this portion of your plan, see the completion of your plan. And we do beg, Father Yahweh, that you would help us to have true mercy and compassion and consideration for your people in the struggles, the various struggles that we all experience, the traumas that we've experienced, the things that we've seen in our lifetime. We do know, Father Yahweh, that it makes a mark on our mind, but we do ask, Father Yahweh, that you would help us to heal and draw close to you. You are Yahweh, our Rafakah, Yahweh, our healer, and we do pray, Father Yahweh, that we would take on your healing ways, that we would live in accordance to your standard forever. We praise you, we thank you in all things, in unity with the great body of priests, seed of the last days anointed witness, Yisrayl Hawkins, through Yahshua Messiah, and we do pray. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Yahweh bless.